Okay, just to give you a little context of why I'm here, I'm giving you a publisher's perspective. I wanted to emphasize that. I'm at Georgetown University Press, and just to give you a tiny bit of background, if you don't know us, we're a small to mid-sized university press. We publish about 35 to 40 titles a year, and we have a couple of journals as well. We publish in 5 major subject areas: international affairs, political science and public policy, bioethics, religion and ethics, and also languages and linguistics. And we actually publish a lot of real sort of hardcore language textbooks as well. So I'm here because we participated along with Dan and Franny and SIPIX and Coursera in a pilot program with Dan's class to provide some materials, the campus-based class and the MOOC. So one of the first questions, of course, a lot of publishers are maybe asking themselves is, given the definition of MOOC as being massively open, what is our role? If all the materials are expected to be open access, freely available, what is the publisher's role? If the content is all video lectures, if it is discussion boards, where does the publisher's role come in? And while I would agree that a lot of publishers, in fact university presses, are experimenting with open access publications as well as paid materials, that's still something that's in an experimental phase, and we're certainly not completely open access at this point. What I do see, and I think a lot of people kind of hinted at this on the panel so far, is that MOOCs are moving towards being a little less massive and a little less open, actually. There's still traditional, very massive and very open MOOCs out there, but as more traditional universities become involved, like Harvard and MIT with edX, for example, Georgetown has also recently joined edX, we're seeing the classes become more, a little bit less open. So they're focused on enrolled students. They're also focused on tuition-based classes, so they're not completely open or free. So that actually, sorry, I'm going to flip to this second slide. Ooh, shoot. Now I can't go back. Sorry, my fault. Can you go back? Oh, thank you. Manual override. Yes. So what I'm seeing with the MOOCs evolving more towards a familiar distance learning model is that publishers have actually been providing quality materials for these type of classes for a long time now. For tuition-based distance learning classes, what we talked about hybrid or blended courses, we talked about flipped classroom models. Our materials are already being used in those classes. I can say from my role as an IP manager, we get requests all the time for use of our classes on different LMS systems like Blackboard, for example. So we're already doing that. We're familiar with that. We have sort of a business model or pricing model set up for that. But it really depends on what type of MOOC we're talking about. So questions we might ask is, how open is it, as I just said? Is it a free class? Is it a freemium class? Like, do students get to upgrade? Do they get to earn a credit if they pay something, for example? Or is it strictly fee-based? Is it a tuition-based MOOC? Also, what subject area? As Dan pointed out, social sciences and humanities, a little bit different animal than doing a computer science class or a math class, something where testing is really easy to do, sort of in a computer-based manner where, you know, everything can be checked by an algorithm, and there's very little sort of teaching assistance needed or things like that. And also there is the fact that, is there the demand for purely open access materials or licensed materials, or is there a balance that we can reach? Does the class, like Dan's, there was a mixture of free and paid materials. And the thing that I wanted to highlight, as you can see in big letters here, is that text still matters. I recently read an article, actually, in higher ed, Inside Higher Ed, that said that hardcore MOOC users, one of the things that they pointed out is that it's very difficult when you're in just a video lecture-based class to review materials. Also depends what subject area you're studying. I think interacting with text is vitally important for engaging with certain topics. You just cannot get away from that in certain subject areas. So, on to some big positives that I see. Opportunities for publishers. Some of these have been touched on by Franny and some others, but I'm just going to cover them quickly. Definitely the possibility to deliver content to potentially huge audiences, diverse audiences that we cannot reach right now, perhaps, that cannot afford our materials, don't even know how to find or reach our materials, would be a big plus. Also, increasing, obviously, like I said, discoverability and even use of the content on a huge global scale is very attractive. The other thing that I think maybe we have touched on maybe just a little bit is the ability to find and serve that independent learner or a non-traditional learner. as well as communities of practice, which I think is something that Dan was actually hinting at, sort of MOOCs could go towards. It's not sort of a formal course that takes place once, it's a network of learning that sort of happens in an ongoing way. And we in the university press world are very interested in this concept of communities of practice, and we're trying to tap into those and serve those communities. And then we get to ask ourselves some questions about what type of scholarly communication is really needed for this specific type of learning that's happening. And I think that actually opens up opportunities for us to rethink how we can package and deliver content. And just one example that I thought of was the fact that several publishers, both, I know some trade publishers who are doing this, Penguin, for example, does this, but also a lot of university presses are experimenting with what we call shorts, or in-brief works. Usually these are only published in ebook format, in digital format, and these texts might fit the current MOOC pedagogy very well, because they're a little bit shorter, they're easy to digest, cover, focus on maybe a specific topic or give a quick overview of a larger topic. And so that could fit the sort of model of chunking things up and unbundling content. And so I think that idea has a lot of potential. And one last thing I didn't put on this slide, but I wanted to sort of emphasize, and I was inspired a little bit by Tim O'Reilly's keynote yesterday too, was actually, I think this might be a potential acquisitions tool. And the reason why I thought about that was he was pointing out like all these sort of like things on YouTube that people were really excited about, like the minute physics, and you know the Khan Academy sort of started like that too. He's like, I'm going to give you a fun little 5-minute, you know, this is how you do a basic, you know, calculus equation or something like that. And so I think there's a lot of potential to sort of see what's popular and what's working on these MOOC platforms, and see how these professors who maybe aren't even stars, like superstar public academics, but have been teaching at their universities for a long time, are legends, in fact, at their universities, and have spent a lot of time developing materials and are taking this next step to put it into an online format and might be doing some really amazing things, and you can pull that out and maybe put it into maybe a more traditional print format, or maybe even just a digital textbook format that integrates maybe some of the videos and some of the other elements. So I think there's actually a lot of exciting things that can happen. And the one example I wanted to point out, if you want to look this up, there was a New Yorker article called Laptop U recently, and they highlighted a Harvard professor, a longtime classical Greek literature professor, who is doing his first MOOC, and he's actually also in the process of publishing a 700-page textbook with Belknap Press, which is associated, it's an imprint of Harvard University Press. And I thought that was really interesting that these were sort of being almost developed at the same time, and they might have, that book, the outcome of how he approached that book, which is called The Ancient Greek Hero in 24 Hours. I don't know how you can read a 700-page book in 24 hours, but you could try. Might have been sort of influenced by him having to take a whole new look at his class and how he's presenting it to students, and sort of that is then translated into what we consider a more traditional print format. So I thought that was pretty exciting, actually, as one of the opportunities. And now I'm going to talk about some challenges and concerns. And these are some things that, again, going back to what O'Reilly mentioned yesterday, are some loops that need to be closed, I guess, for us. One thing, obviously, is copyright. Actually, Dan already mentioned this. There was a lot of, apparently, piracy going on during his class, and there's also, from what I've read, a lot of plagiarism issues in these classes, because a lot of students will go out either on discussion boards or in social media and sort of just like post a lot of answers to tests, or point people to links to free materials that were actually supposed to be paid for. And so my question is, you know, massive plagiarism equals massive piracy. It looks like maybe that matches up. And how to sort of manage that, I'm not sure. It's kind of like whack-a-mole with, you know, digital piracy right now. So that's definitely a big concern for, I would say, publishers in general. And also just how can we provide a really quick, simple way that is copyright compliant for people to access these materials? If it's something as simple as layering a service like CIPIX over a Coursera class, where it actually monitors that kind of usage and makes sure only people that are enrolled in the class get access to the materials, or only people that pay for them get access to them, and that would be something that we'd obviously want to take care of and sort of close that loop. But another issue that may or may not come up depending on the situation is these MOOC platform providers are talking about who owns this material. Is it the professor? Is it the provider, if they, you know, put a lot of effort into helping create the class? Or is it even the institution? Is it the university that owns that professor's class that was created on a MOOC, if they pay that professor to do that class? And the opportunities there, as far as like what David was saying, was like, what's that magic thing that happens between we're doing this and we're making money on it, would be to license these classes, either to, for example, community colleges that don't have a particular class available, or sharing sort of resources across a large public university network. So what happens when these are licensed on? If there's third-party material being used, how do we keep track of that? And how do we retrieve that usage data or collect fees on it? Second thing is content discovery and delivery. How do we streamline this? Like, how can professors easily find this material, and how can students easily access it? And again, it's going to happen probably through a learning management platform or a MOOC platform. And so particularly as a small university press, we don't have a system that can handle that kind of thing. We would have to work with a learning management system and maybe another provider sort of to monitor that and provide that. Or how do we even deliver those files, for example? How do we deliver chunked up pieces of text or even full text to a massive number of not only non-enrolled students, but also maybe enrolled students as well, simultaneously, two totally different things. So that's one thing I'm definitely thinking about and looking for either partners, service providers, because we as a small press cannot handle that sort of thing on our own right now. The one last challenge I want to talk about is the big question of sustainability. I'm not even going to try to answer that first question. Is open access publishing sustainable? Is open access education totally sustainable? Not even going to try to touch it, but that's the overall question that hangs over everything. And then, of course, the expectation that if I'm taking a free class, I should just get free materials, right? And so the question becomes for a publisher, how do we want to do this? And I think it's very individual, and it depends on what kind of MOOC it is, how open it is, and what you're willing to do with that material. Is someone asking for just a chapter? Are they asking for several chapters or a whole book? What is your comfort level for either offering that for free in exchange with what I call sort of like in a joking way, Hungary will work for access to big data, or the traditional fee-based model? And I think access to that big data could be really important, and I'll get to that in a little bit more in a second, but how could we, on the fee-based side, adapt our traditional business models for course packet permission fees? Considering the massive size of these courses, is that something we need to think about? And Franny already mentioned sort of geographical-based pricing, which is definitely of interest to us. Also, though, how do we determine pricing when it used to be based on enrollment? And these classes the enrollment in these MOOCs that are truly open is completely unpredictable and also unstable. So how can you determine a fair price when you used to determine it based on real usage, like you knew there were going to be 60 students in that class using that material? Then there's the collection of micropayments. Another thing that a small publisher like ourselves, or somebody doesn't have the resources to sort of handle and take in those kind of small payments from all over the world, and perhaps, as I mentioned, apply a geographical pricing. So the next thing I just wanted to briefly touch on was our first MOOC experience, which I touched on. I said, you know, we participated in a pilot program where we provided some materials from one of our books for Dan's class. It was running simultaneously as a on-campus class and also as a MOOC. I would say overall it was a good experience. Our paid material, we decided to make it paid because it was a significant amount of material with several chapters actually. And it was one of 23 required readings. And the fact that the MOOC students were not prepared to pay for anything, and despite that we had overall, not just our press, but all the paid materials, there were a total of 3,300 downloads of paid materials that people actually paid for. And I wanted to emphasize that really our participation wasn't in a large part facilitated by the fact that we were able to provide an easy and compliant, copyright compliant access to these materials, and that's something that CIPICS provided for us. And then getting back to the big data that I mentioned earlier, the resulting data that we received so far gave us a really great breakdown of when and where, in other words, where in the world geographically our materials were purchased, as well as usage of paid versus free materials, which was really interesting for us to see. It also showed us exactly during the cycle of the class where our materials were most purchased, if it fell right when that topic was being discussed. And also just it was interesting to see, for example, that of our purchases that I saw, they came from 14 other different countries outside of the United States, and there was a total breakdown of which countries they occurred in. And so that's something like that, harvesting that sort of data, like that I will work for, big data sort of model, can provide a lot as thing to a publisher as well. It's not just about fees, it's about learning about this new way of how people will be studying and taking classes, and how we can adapt our materials, and we need data to sort of understand that. And I think as much as Dan would like take the data he's used to maybe change some of the things in his class, I think publishers can use a lot of that usage data to make real decisions maybe about, okay, this material got a huge student response, this material worked really well, and so what do we do right there? Or why aren't students using this? Or what kinds of students were using it? Were they all the enrolled students? Were they non-enrolled? Where in the world are people interested in our topics and our subject areas? And the fact that even if you provide materials for free, that data is really useful to us to analyze and to figure out who's using what, where we could maybe focus some efforts on marketing or finding some new groups of people that might be interested in our materials. And the fact that giving a little bit of something away for free might interest in some people in buying the whole thing for the whole book, or actually going out and finding another way to get that material through Amazon or wherever they're going to purchase it. So I think that represents like a really good opportunity for us to take a look at what we're doing and get some real data. We already have some data on course usage. Obviously, our sales reports give us sort of a big picture of like, okay, this many copies were ordered at this university, this class was taught twice over the the last couple of years. But we're not getting that real like usage of it. What happened? How many students actually downloaded that? How many times was it purchased? What was the actual feedback that we got from students in the class about using that material? So I think that could be potentially really valuable. So that's all I have right now.